When we think of the Industrial Revolution, our minds usually jump to brilliant inventors and these incredible world-changing machines. But that's only half the story. It's really the story of how one single technological shift completely redrew the map of global power, creating a brand new world of winners and losers. So before steam power came along, manufacturing was literally chained to the landscape. If you wanted to build a factory, well, you had to find a fast-flowing river. Your power source was completely fixed by geography. Then the steam engine arrives, and bam! It's a total game changer. Suddenly, you could generate power pretty much anywhere you could burn fuel. It was this incredible promise of freedom for industry. But this is the big mystery we're really digging into today. If this amazing new technology had the potential to unleash progress absolutely anywhere, why didn't it? Why is it that some nations just surged ahead, creating wealth on a scale never seen before, while others just didn't? Or worse, they saw their own industries fall apart. That's what we're going to figure out. All right, here's the game plan. We'll start with the engine that really did change everything. Then we'll look at this great divergence that it created. We'll explore the story you don't always hear, the story of deindustrialization. Then we'll see how different nations forged their own unique paths, look at the huge role the state played, and finally, see how this all shook out into a completely new global order. Okay, let's dive right in. What was it about the steam engine that made it so incredibly revolutionary? Well, the big deal wasn't just more power. It was the concentration of that power. For the very first time, you could build one single factory powered by steam that could outproduce dozens of smaller, older workshops combined. This just created an absolutely massive, exponential leap in what you could make. And this power wasn't just stuck on land. Putting steam engines on ships and trains completely transformed transportation, basically shrinking the globe and creating a truly interconnected world economy. So you've got this incredible new technology. But as it starts to spread out from Britain, the way it gets adopted is, well, it's super uneven. Why? What was the secret sauce that separated the leaders from everyone else? Britain, it turns out, just had the perfect recipe. It had huge reserves of coal that were really easy to get to, and that was the fuel for the engines. It had a whole network of rivers that made it easy to move raw materials and finished goods around. And, this is so crucial, it had a government whose policies were all about encouraging innovation and business. That combination gave them a massive head start on everyone else. But here's a really important point. It wasn't just about having the right stuff in the ground. In many other parts of Europe, you had these powerful, wealthy landowners who actively fought against industrialization. They saw factories and big cities as a direct threat to their old-school way of life and their power. So it wasn't just a question of, can we do this? It was, should we? Technology literally had to fight its way through the existing social order. And this brings us to the flip side of the industrial coin. Because while some nations were building up all this incredible industrial might, others were actually seeing their own industries get dismantled. This wasn't just a matter of failing to keep up. We're talking about active deindustrialization. And this really gets to the heart of it. The industrial boom happening in Europe wasn't happening in a bubble. Its success was often directly tied to the decline of manufacturing centers in other places, like Asia and the Middle East, a decline that was often pushed along by colonial force. Let's just look at one specific, really stark example. Indian iron. For centuries, India had this amazing history of making this incredible Wootz steel. But as British colonial power grew, the authorities got nervous. They were worried about weapons, sure, but also about India becoming industrially independent. So what did they do? They restricted local production. Then, they flooded the market with cheaper British iron. And the ancient Indian ironworks? Well, they just couldn't compete. The whole industry collapsed. And believe me, this was not a one-off thing. We see the exact same pattern playing out across all sorts of industries. Shipbuilding in India and Southeast Asia, it was once a strong local tradition, but it got redirected to serve the British Royal Navy, and the local industry was basically smothered. World-famous textiles from India and Egypt, their markets just vanished as cheap, mass-produced fabrics from British factories flooded their own countries. So, what about the countries that did pull it off? The ones that managed to industrialize? Well, their stories weren't all the same either. Even among the success stories, there was no single path forward. Just look at the difference between France and the United States. France took a much more gradual path, and it was often driven by big, state-sponsored infrastructure projects. The change was slower, and maybe not as socially disruptive as it was in Britain. The US, on the other hand, it was a story of pure explosive growth, especially after the Civil War. It was fueled by seemingly endless natural resources and a gigantic internal market, which created a totally different kind of industrial power. And this brings us to a third, totally different model. One where it wasn't entrepreneurs calling the shots, but the state itself that was firmly in the driver's seat. The contrast between the US and Russia here is just wow, it's stark. In America, industrialization was mostly a bottom-up thing, driven by entrepreneurs trying to sell stuff to a growing consumer market. But in Russia, it was a top-down command from the Tsar. And the motivation wasn't about consumer goods, it was all about keeping up with military power. The result for society? Widespread worker discontent and brutal conditions that would eventually help fuel the Russian Revolution. Then you've got Japan's completely unique path. They looked over and saw Western powers carving up China, and they basically said, nope, that is not going to happen to us. Their industrialization was a conscious, strategic decision. It was an act of self-preservation, a deliberate, super-fast modernization designed specifically to build up enough strength to stay independent and resist foreign control. So when you put all of these different stories together, the leaders, the followers, the state-driven models, and the ones that were deindustrialized, the end result is a complete and total remaking of the world. And this chart just shows the absolutely stunning result of that transformation. By the year 1900, global manufacturing was just overwhelmingly dominated by Europe and the United States. But look at this, just 150 years earlier, before the steam engine really took over the world, big manufacturing centers in Asia held a huge piece of that pie. The entire world had been completely rebalanced. So here's the real takeaway. The new global hierarchy wasn't just about armies or old-school empires anymore. The world became defined by industrial muscle. Who had the factories? Who had the technology? Who had the economic power that came with all of it? That became the new measure of a nation's strength. And that kind of leaves us with a big question to think about. These patterns, they're not just ancient history. As we navigate our own huge technological shifts today, like artificial intelligence, are we maybe seeing these exact same dynamics play out all over again? Could we be witnessing the start of a new great divergence? And if we are, who are going to be the winners and losers this time around?